Chapter 1: A New Battle. Dust and the last gasps of a long-expired fire swirled in the heavy air of the cottage as she entered, only visible in slivers of light that pierced the shoddy walls. Nearly motionless at the breach, her intense brown eyes slowly searched the oppressive darkness as she sampled the air. A faint smell caused an involuntary snarl of her nose as her senses worked to pierce the veil. The sound of creaking and a faint dripping filled the space, but seemed sourceless as she continued her vigilant scan. After a few moments, she turned back to the gloom of the forest. "Go fetch your superior and my retinue," she stated calmly to the young guard just outside the doorway. "Ma'am, I am to escort," he started before being cut off. "I did not ask a question," she stated coldly before turning back to the interior. In a moment, the young man was off on a jog. As the guard disappeared into the twilight shadows of the forest trail, the fainter sounds of her surroundings felt more intense. Satisfied with her seeming privacy, she closed her eyes and clutched the large beads around her neck briefly before her eyes opened once again, pure white. Slowly, she lifted one hand and moved it from side to side, scanning the surroundings with her second sight. The hand moved slowly, unnaturally steadily, as her fingers twitched, as if she was methodically strumming an invisible instrument, while the other iterated over the beads around her neck. At first, it felt like a slight tug against her soul. Perhaps the villagers were correct in their assessment of a curse at play. While the sensation was not particularly strong, she felt a creeping sensation from deep within, as the hairs on the back of her neck and arms erected themselves. This only caused her to pause for a moment before pushing her sight further into the gloom. Her second sight was more like an entire second set of senses. The faint trace she now sought to explore could best be described as a rancid-tasting smell that was attempting to entwine itself with her very being. It was the traces of a very dark ritual or curse, and while faint, it deeply disturbed her that she could not locate the source. The more she pushed, the less tangible the source, until something lashed out. It hit her, all of her senses at once. Her nostrils flared, and her hand wavered as she shuddered before recoiling. Even with her eyes closed, horrifying, unfathomable scenes tore through her mind before she dropped the sight. Her eyes opened once again with their usual dark brown irises that nearly matched her pupils. Her naturally cold and calm exterior was visibly broken as a bead of sweat rolled down her forehead from beneath her intricate covering. Her mind raced to understand what she had felt. Never in all her time as a sister did she feel such a dark presence. While it did have the familiar feeling of a curse, the intensity and sourcelessness of it unsettled her. By definition, the trailing of a curse must have a source. It emanates from the cursed person or object as a wafting stench that any sister is trained to locate. This trailing seemingly emanated from everywhere and nowhere, almost as if the curse itself surrounded her. Regaining her composure, she stepped through the doorway. She could see very little of the interior. However, now that her eyes had adjusted to the dim, she could navigate the larger obstacles. A torch would have been helpful for sight, but a hindrance to her other senses. Moving methodically through the space, she brushed aside fallen objects with her feet as quietly as possible as she searched the space for her quarry. It was at the threshold of the only other room in the cottage when she knew she was close. Upon taking her first step into the tiny room, her boot landed on a unique texture, and when attempting to withdraw it, the feeling of resistance and a slight tearing sound jumped to the forefront of her mind. While she wished for it to be nothing more than spilled honey, the unmistakable copper smell that filled the air told her that it was blood. I should have sensed a corpse, she thought as she withdrew to the larger room. Everything was wrong, extremely, unnaturally wrong. Her lifetime of dedicated and harsh training had prepared her for the duties of a sister, but what she faced now was something new. And with her long lifetime of experience, new was very bad. Protocol called for her to continue to trust her senses of the otherworldly. However, the rush of fear she felt compelled her to seek the light. With a rapid hand motion, she conjured a simple sigil of protection and applied it to herself as her other hand drew her blade with practiced precision. The weight of the room seemed to press down on her as she stood silently, searching for any further cues. Faint groans of the wood structure and the scurrying of tiny creatures in the thatch roof boomed in her mind. Metallic smells of blood mingled with the sour of dark magics, now forcing her nose into a constant snarl and pursing her lips. If this was a curse, she should have nothing to fear, yet the tingle down her spine did not relent. Damn this entire place, she thought as she took a deep breath and made several magical gestures with her offhand before rubbing down her blade. Slowly, the weapon began to glow and softly illuminate the room. Surrounding her were the tossed belongings of a person of modest means. A few homemade candles and other household items lay scattered about, seemingly from an overturned rustic table at the side of the room. Waving the blade ahead of herself, she could just make out the reflection of it in a pool of still, drying blood that filled the doorway, and of a bed in the shadows of the room. Straining her eyes as she might, she could not make out the source of the blood. Grasping her beads once more, she pushed herself into her second sight, this time with ferocity. Her eyes burst open, featureless once again, as she held her sword before her. Using the blade to illuminate the room ahead, she moved into the small bedroom, ready for battle. Whatever you are, you face a sister of the Order of Morihamma.